Hi, it's Mr. Baumgarten and welcome back to another video. This is a project I've been wanting to do for a little while. It is going to be a guided introduction to the Python Flask library, which we use for creating web apps and web servers. We're going to create a project together from nothing all the way through to the very end. And I'm calling it Tasker. It's just a standard to-do task list kind of app. Where we're going to be able to organize it into folders, perhaps for every subject. And then when you click on the folder, you're going to see the individual lists of tasks that are grouped into that folder. And then click on an individual task and you'll be able to edit it. Change the priority, change the status, set due date reminders, all that kind of thing. And we'll be able to create folders, create tasks, edit existing tasks. And so on. And we'll have a login system so that we can log in and just see our own personal tasks, and other people can log in and create their own private individual tasks. So there's quite a few steps to this. So feel free to jump to the relevant part, especially if you're returning to this video and you're working through it in stages. We're going to create the basic web server first of all, get routes up and running. We're going to do the HTML front end and the CSS stuff to make it all nice and pretty. We're going to do Jinga 2 templating, which is the templating system that's built into Python's Flask library. We're going to create our database to store all of our tasks and our user accounts. We're going to then extract the information from that database and turn it into HTML to customize it and show all of our individual tasks and folders. And then when we make changes to our task, we want to be able to save those back to the database. Then once we've kind of got the core of the task system up and running, we'll add the login system to it, implement some security for our passwords, make sure they're properly hashed, and then we'll upload everything to the web and it should be good to go. So some assumed knowledge and software installations. I'm going to assume you've already got Python 3 installed up and running on your system. I'm going to be using VS Code as my editor. Feel free to use whatever editor you like. The only two extensions to VS Code that I will be using is the Python extension and the live server extension for when we're making our HTML. The only Python libraries you'll need to install are Flask and the Flask login library. And then I'm also going to be using a tool called the DB browser for SQLite when we are creating and setting up our database. So I will assume some existing knowledge of programming fundamentals. You understand what variables are, if statements, for loops, that kind of thing. And you're comfortable with doing string manipulation, so on. Really, the tutorial is pitched for people who have been programming for about 6 to 12 months. All right, so in my mind, I'm making this for students who are coming towards the end of their first year of either a GCSE or IB diploma computer science course. So if that's you, strap on your seatbelt and let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so what I've got, let me move this out of the way. I have built the project entirely already, but I'm going to be rebuilding it now with you from scratch. So I've got a second copy on my screen that I'll be referring to as notes. But you can see here I've got my VS Code editor and I have a project folder that is empty. So the first thing we are going to do is get the core of Flask up and running. So if I create a Python file, and let's call this something really exciting like server.py, and this is going to be my Python web server. So I need to import from the Flask library. So from Flask, I'm going to import in Flask. And we will be adding to this later on in due course. So the first thing I need to create is to create my web application. And so that's just app is equal to Flask. And we give our Flask a name for the server. And convention is to use the built-in Python magic name of your program. So in this case, __name underscore underscore. Right, once we have that, to create our basic web server is quite straightforward. So we use what's known as a decorator, which is just a Python thing that will wrap one function around another. And so you can see here, basically I'm using app because app is what I've called it up in line 3. So at app.route, and this is a function where I say, okay, this is going to be for the slash path of my web server. What do I want to show when I visit the home page of my web server, the slash address? All right, I want to run a function, so I'm just going to call this in my index page, and let's just print someone, whoops, is visiting our website. All right, so that's what's going to print out in my Python editor, my Python terminal, sorry, and then whatever I return is what will get sent to the web browser. So let's just say index page. Right, and that's this is our very first foray into Flask. So let's just get this part up and running, and then we'll add to it. So app.run, and here I'm going to say I'm going to host this on 0000. So 0.0.0.0, and this is just saying make this web page visible on all the network cards attached to my machine. So it means you'll be able to browse to it from another laptop connected to the same network as this machine, and I'm going to attach it to port 80, which is the default for the web, and I'm going to turn on debug mode. That'll help us out with a few things later on. And this is actually all we need. So if I save that and run it, we'll get all these lines pop up showing us the debugger is active and that we're running on 0.0.0.80. And so now if I get my web browser back, where have I got it? All right, and if I drag that into frame, I should just keep it open, and I go to localhost. Whoops, I've still got the demo, my other copy up and running. Let's close that off. There we go. Index page. Right, so that's the string which we configured in here. So hello there. All right, if I save that and go back to my web browser and refresh it, index page, hello there. And if I look at my terminal, we'll see here is the string that I told it to print out. All right, so I've got my index page. Well, we're going to need more than just our index page, so let's get the rest of it up and running. We'll make placeholders for all the different end routes now. So app.route, and we're going to want a registration page later on. So let's call this registration page, and we'll just return registration page. We'll do app. Let's just lower this down a bit. Okay, app.route. We are going to want a login page. So login page, return login page. App.route. We're going to want a log out page. If you can log in, you need to be able to log out. So this is just getting the core skeleton of our system up and running, and we'll have a main page, which is where we'll see all the different tasks and be able to edit them. So let's just call this main page. Really exciting names, I know, but hey, it's functional. All right, and now if I save, file save. All right, and we'll notice the term, because I've got it in debug mode, it has automatically detected my changes. And now if I come here and try to go to /main, Right, there's my main page. If I go to login, there's my login page. What else did I have? Register. There's my registration page and my logout page. Okay, so they are up and running, and that is your very first Flask web server. Okay, so it doesn't do a lot, but hey, it's running and we can visit the different pages. So the next step is to really get started with some of our HTML. So that we can, I mean, this is all nice, sending a little text message, but we want something a bit prettier than that. And so we're going to get started now creating our HTML structure. So there's a couple of different things that we're going to do here. We need to create a couple of folders. So I'm going to create a folder here called static, and I'm going to create another folder called templates. And these are folders that Flask will automatically look for. So let's create inside our templates. Which one shall we start with? Shall we start with the login page? Is fairly straightforward as far as the HTML goes. So let's make that up first. A new file inside this folder, and I'm just going to call it login.html. Okay, so if you haven't done much HTML before, there's a few structural guidelines to follow. So the first tag is usually, as you can see, it's actually trying to give me here, is a doc type HTML. So all of HTML works inside these triangle brackets. HTML, our language is just going to be English. And so whenever the way HTML works is you define a document tag, and whatever you want it to be included within that tag goes inside the opening and closing. All right, so here I'm opening my HTML, and then the slash version, so triangle brackets with the forward slash, and then the HTML again. So everything in between, this is the opening tag for the HTML and the closing. So all my HTML content needs to go between those. All right, and so inside that, I'm going to have the head section, which is where I'm going to set up a whole bunch of attributes for my document, and then I'm going to have my main body section, which is where the actual HTML that I want displayed on the web browser will go. The head is usually just used for a bunch of settings kind of stuff. So let's just put those in here. We're going to set up some meta attributes. So meta name equals viewport. We're just defining a few little attributes that tend to be useful for things like mobile web browsers. This will tell it to scale better on a mobile device. So width equals device hyphen width, initial hyphen scale equals 1. All right, and like I said, it just improves how it works on a mobile device to have that. And we'll give it a title. We'll call it Tasker. All right, and this is what will appear inside the tab bar of your page when it's open. All right, so let's define my HTML document. Div tags, you've probably if you've ever looked at HTML, you see there's div tags everywhere. Div is just short for a divider. It doesn't really do anything by default, but it's used a lot to help with the CSS rendering later on. So HTML, when it's defined in the modern style, you put all your content, your text content, and your document structure in the HTML, and then you use a different language called CSS to do all the styling and the layout, the visual layout of your document. And I'll kind of show you how that works. So I'm going to create a div called a container, or give it a class of container. The class names and ID tags we can refer to inside the CSS. And so that's why we tend to use class names for a lot of things. It provides a category that we can then say in the CSS, wherever you see a class of container, follow these rules. All right, and so within my container, so I'm going to put all the content from this document inside this container, and then I'm going to use h1 as a heading, and I'm going to also give this a class that I want to give it. I want it to show an icon later on, and I'm going to do that through the CSS. But the heading is just tasker, and then I'm going to put in a paragraph and just say, please log in to continue. And then we're going to have a HTML form. So form and the action. So when the form is submitted, where should the web browser send the results, send the information? So I want that to go to my login page. And I'm going to use a method of post. So when we are making HTTP requests across the internet, there are different methods that we can use within the protocol for sending information. There's get, there's post, there's put. Post is what's most common for web forms. So we'll just stick with a post. And so within my form, I'm going to put in my my fields. So I'm going to put each of these inside a div as well, because that will allow me to style it later on. And so I'm going to create an input element of type is equal to text. So that's the type of input that I want. I want someone to be able to type some text. And I need to give each input field a name. So name is equal to user ID. And then the placeholder text. So what's going to appear in it before anyone's typed. I'm just going to have that also say user ID. And then I'm going to close that input tag. And I've put a slash here at the end of it. It'll work without it. It's just my so tags that don't have, so things like with a form, we've got the opening and then the closing version of it. Some tags don't have a closed version, and so you can put the slash there for those to indicate this is it by itself. Modern days, you tend to actually not do it quite so much. It was important previously. Anyway, I'm just going to copy and paste this and now make some new changes. So I want a type of password, and by using the type equals password, it will put the stars up as they're typing instead of displaying it on screen. But the name of this field will also be password, and the placeholder text can also be password. And then my third one here is going to be type of submit, and that's going to give me a submission button. So name can also be submit. Instead of placeholder, because this is going to be a button, I'm going to give it value. You give it a value, and that's what you want to be displayed as the button text. So value equals login, and I'm also going to give this a class of icon login, so that I can put an icon inside the button later on through my CSS. Then let's see, I might just put in another div with a HR, which is a horizontal rule, so a horizontal line. And let's put in here one more div. Class is equal to small, so I'm going to just make this everything inside this div is going to be a smaller font. And I'm just going to say no account, question mark. All right, register. But I want register to be a link, and I want it to be a link to my registration page. So that is an A tag, which is short for anchor, and the href is the page that I want to go to when I click on that. All right, and so I'm going to put this register text between the open and closing A's, and where do I want them to go when they click on it? I want them to go to my register page. And I think now that's pretty well it. We will have to link to our CSS actually. So let's come up to the back into our header section, and we'll say link, and we just say this is the relevance for this is it's going to be a style sheet, and the type of the content is going to be text/CSS. A lot of this is just figuring out what's. I don't have this memorized. I'm referring to my notes, and you know, other than the first time where I once learned it, you know, you just learn this is what it needs, you know, and you just copy it every time. All right. No one has this kind of stuff memorized. You just make yourself up a good set of reference notes for things like HTML, and especially CSS. CSS is a nightmare to learn sometimes. There are some challenging parts to it. Get some good reference notes and just keep referring to them. Okay. So href. So here, where do I want my CSS document to come from? I'm going to be putting that into my static folder. So it's going to be /static/ and let's just call this login.css. And finally, I want this CSS to apply to the screen. All right, because you can set this up to have different CSS files for things like printing, so pages and stuff like that. All right, and that should now do it. So if I save this, because this is a HTML document and not a Python document, I can, when I right click now, instead of running Python, I've got open with live server. So let's open this up and see what we've got so far. Okay, so I have HTML, I've got my tasker, please log in to continue, and we can see here I've got my placeholder text of user ID and password, and clearly I've been using some user IDs here in the past, but I can just type something in, type in a password, and you can see there I've got the stars, and there's my login button, and there's my no account register. If I click the login button, it'll take me to it's taking me to an address that doesn't work because my web server is running on port 80, and the open with web server didn't take me there that way. So let's get it working on Flask rather than running through. Okay, so rather than so let's stop the live web server. Let's get this HTML page working on Flask, and then I'll show you the magic of the CSS. So if I come back to my server page, the next thing I'm going to do is all right. So I've got it saved in my templates folder, and this is a folder that Flask will know to look into for rendering templates. So I need to also add to my import that I want to import the render template function. And this is my login page. So let's come down to login, and instead of returning login page, I'm going to change this to return render template, and then I put in the name of the HTML file here, login.html. And notice how I haven't told it to look in the templates folder. That's where Flask is automatically going to go looking for that. And so if I save this and go back to my web browser, right, I've got my index page, but if I go to /login, oops, okay, it was showing us the CSS. It was pre-caching it, but if I do a full refresh, okay, you can see this is what it currently looks like. And if I click login, it takes me, it's posting, which at the moment we haven't set it up to be allowed, and the register button takes me to my registration page. All right, so that's behaving as I would expect, but let's make it look pretty like it did a second ago when it had the old version, well, my demo version pre-cached. So yeah, we need to make some CSS. And so the idea with the CSS is you want to try and make your HTML pages so that they will be functional even without the CSS. And so that's what we've got here. It's not pretty, but the HTML would work. And now we use the CSS to apply the styling to it. So to do that, I'm going to come into my static folder, create a new file, login.css, right? And you'll remember that here in my HTML we had /static/login.css, so that is the file that is going to be looked for by that page when it's getting rendered, right? So there's if you haven't done any CSS before, let me quickly introduce you to what's going on here. So there's a number of CSS works on what's known as selectors, and we can select things based upon a HTML tag or upon a class or an ID, or other attributes even within our HTML. So for instance, if I say body and HTML and then a set of open and curly braces, I'm saying wherever the body tag exists within my document, which is here, right, I want this rule to apply, and I also want it to apply wherever the HTML tag applies. Right, and so this is whatever I put in here is going to affect things globally because everything is inside my body and HTML tags. And so I'm going to use this just to zero out the margin. Oops. And I'm going to zero out the padding. So the overall premise of the way these rules work is all the rules get wrapped inside a set of open and closing curly braces. You've got the rule that you're wanting to set, and then a colon, and then the value you want to set it to, and then a semicolon to denote the end of that individual rule. So margin is set to 0, padding is set to 0. I want it to be the full height of the page, so 100%, and I'm going to set the font family. All right, so instead of using the Times New Roman, which is the defaults, I'm just going to use Helvetica and sans serif, except I'll get rid of the Arial. And I'm going to set this up as a display grid. I'll talk about that later on. And I'm going to give the whole thing a nice background color, just a slightly off-white, so F8, F8, F8. Just a little bit of a hint of a color there. Right, and then so if I save this and flick back to here, all right, we can see when I did a refresh, the font changed and we have our just slightly off-white background. And yeah, and that font change applied globally to everything. All right, let's do the container. Now, the dot indicates I want you to select anything with a class of this name. All right, so dot refers to the class attribute that we used in our HTML. All right, and so what am I going to do here? This is where I'm going to fix up my centering. So margin is going to be auto, so it'll automatically adjust the margin on above, below, to the left and to the right. I'm going to put some padding around my container of 20 pixels. I'm going to give it a nice border, so 1 pixel wide, solid, and I'll make this a little a light gray, CCC, but I'm also going to give it the border a little bit of rounding on it on the corners, so give it a border radius about 10 pixels, and the background color inside the container can be solid white, so it contrasts with the off-white we've got around it. So if I save that and go back, all right, we now have a white box with a little bit of a border around it, and you notice the corners are curved, but that's it. It's fully centered, and it's that margin auto, so automatically with all the space that we have, automatically adjust the margin on the left and the right, the above and below, within the space available, and that will automatically adjust as I move my web browser screen, resize it. So it's the grid, the height of 100%, and the margin auto that's allowing that centering effect to happen. All right, let's fix up my input elements. So input, I'm going to give this some nice padding. So 5 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 5 pixels on the bottom, and 10 pixels on the left. All right, so if you just give it one number, it will apply it to all 4 sides. If you give it 4 numbers, it rotates clockwise from the top. So the top, above, to the right, to the bottom, to the left. I'm going to change the margin around as well. I need to show you CSS box model. This is what you don't want to learn. All right. What is the difference between the margin and the padding? So you've got the content of your tag. All right. So this is whatever you put inside there. So there's 3 different layers. You've got your padding, then your border, and then your margin. And so the idea between adjusting your padding and your margin, all right, it's in relevance to the border. So when I centered this, I said set the margin to automatically, all right, and I gave the padding a little bit of a number. So I wanted a little bit of space between the content of the form and the border, and so I set that up with the padding. But then I wanted all the leftover space to be set to the margin, and so that's how that centered it. All right, so if I came back here and let's change this padding, just for the sake of argument, to 100 pixels. All right, if I save that and come back and refresh, we'll notice now that there's a lot more padding between the content and the border. So that's the difference between margin and padding. All right, you just need to learn the CSS box model. And this is one of the things that frustrates early CSS students. Learn the box model. All right, it is well worth an investment of your time. Okay, let's carry on. So margin that I was going to set. So these are just values that I experimented with when I designed the form the first time around, and I decided I liked the look of it. All right. Once you learn CSS a little bit, customize this. Make it your own look and feel, by all means, please. All right. I'm only going to walk through creating the CSS for the login form with you. For the main form, I'm just going to upload it and allow you to take my CSS as it is, and then you can customize it and tweak it. So really, I'm just wanting to show you how the basics of how the CSS works. And I'm using the login form as that. So here I've got my input types, which is fine. So now I've just styled my inputs a little bit. All right, I've got a nice curve around them, and I've increased the font size a little bit. But I want to change my button as well. But that's also an input type. How do I change the button without changing, my user ID and my password box? All right, and so I need a more complicated selector. So it's an input, and then in square brackets here, I say where type is equal to submit. All right, you'll remember that that's how we set up the button. And now where you find that, this is the rule that I want to apply. Okay, so it's just another more complicated type of selector. And this can be for any attribute that's inside our HTML. So anywhere where we have value equals something, we can match it in the CSS. All right, so I'm just going to copy and paste in my existing one here, I'm afraid. All right, so if you want to make your buttons look like mine, I suggest you pause here and copy that. The other thing I will do is there's one more type of rule that I'm going to show you, and that's input type equals submit, but I want my button to look different when I'm hovering over it with the mouse. And so to do that, all right, I use a colon, and the keyword is hover, and now I can give it a different rule for when I'm hovering over it. And so all I'm going to do is change the background color a little. All right, so I've got one background color, a shade of blue here, and then a different shade of blue when I'm hovering over it. All right, and now if I save and go back to my page, all right, and there's my button there, and you can see that it changes when I hover over it. Now, why have I got this big gap between on the left of my text? That's where I'm going to put an icon in a little moment. So let me show you how to put the icons there. And I wanted an icon on my tasker as well, and I need to make my no account text small. Right, and so you will recall we had class equals small on this no account register thing. So let's do that. All right, that's just dot small. All right, so you remember the dot is a shortcut for anything that's a class. Right, all right, and that's so that we don't have to do. Otherwise, if we didn't have this shortcut, we would have to do something like div class equals small. Right, and that's just, we don't want to do that. So the dot is just a shortcut method of doing that. And so here I'm just going to say font hyphen size extra small. Right, and that's shrunk that down. So now the icons. Okay, and to do the icons, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to go into my static folder, and I'm going to copy a folder with all of my icons that I've pre-organized. Now, the best place for finding icons for free that are licensed for free use, I got these icons from ionicons.com. All right, and so here, if you search for things like login, all right, there's a login button, and you can click on that, and it is free to download the SVG file. And yeah, so there's hundreds and hundreds of icons here. Just search for what you want. You've got the filled and the unfilled style, and yeah, so outline, filled, sharp, and they're SVG files, which is really handy because that's actually just another form of text. So if I open up my icons folder, and where's my login outline, right? This is, you notice that it kind of looks like HTML, right? It's a triangle bracket tag based language, right? And the structure is exactly the same, right? Technically it's known as XML. The line spaces don't matter, so I'm just going to put that there. But where are we? Let's turn on the word wrap. Okay, so that's the entire content of it there. So learning SVG is beyond, let's call it beyond the scope of this video. But one thing you can do, and certainly one thing I did with these icons, when I found the ones that I wanted, I did have to make a small change to them, which you don't need to learn the SVG to do. All I did was change the colors. All right. So the SVGs that I downloaded, you notice that the website, they are in black. I don't think it calls it black, but yeah, whatever it had there for those colors, I just changed it to white, and that's yeah. So if you're downloading your own icons, just bear that in mind. But otherwise, you can see here that there's a bunch of, so I don't need to save that. There's a bunch of icons that I've already gotten. I will post the links to download those in the comments, in the video description. Okay, but I have my icons. How can I now get them to work in the CSS, right? And I want it in CSS instead of my HTML, because this comes back to what I was saying before, that I want the HTML to work and be functional even without the CSS. I want all my presentation and my stylistic stuff in the CSS as much as possible rather than HTML. Right, so to do that, let's come in here and say, so you remember I made a couple of classes for these. All right, so I've got icon tasker, and I had .icon login. So what goes inside these? It's background colon URL. So this is the web address of where to get the background that's going to go inside this icon. And I've put all of these icons inside an icons folder, which is inside my static folder. So if I go slash, and you notice that VS Code is helpfully showing me my folders. So static, icons, and this is for tasker. This is task done .flat CSV. Okay. Now, if I just do that, let me show you what this will do. All right, I've got a whole. It fills up the entire background of this task, of this heading area. What was it that I put it on? It was here, heading. All right. Tasker was a H1 heading, and I called it icon tasker. All right, so it's filled up that entire heading area with the icon, with a whole row of those icons repeating, which is not what we want. So there's a couple of little extra bits that we need to add to our CSS. I need to say no repeat, and I want it on the left, on the horizontal, and on the vertical I want it centered. So now if I go back and refresh, I only have one because I said no repeat, and it's on the left and it's vertically centered. But now I need to move my heading out of the way. So I'm going to add one more rule to this, and I'm going to say padding left, all right, move it 40 pixels. All right, and so when I refresh, there's now a padding of 40 pixels here, which moves the content 40 pixels to the right. And so that's my app icon. And let's do the same for my login button. So that's just going to be background URL slash static icons login outline. And again, I'm going to say no repeat, left center. But you notice I already had it. I already had that padding there, so I don't need to add it here a second time. And there we go. That's my login form done. The CSS for the other page, I'm just going to make available for download. I'm not going to walk through creating all of that CSS. I mainly wanted to introduce the idea of the selectors. So the dot for the classes, working on an entire tag, and then how to be able to do the attribute ones. Again, find a good reference for CSS documents and just use it. Okay. Okay, so to speed things up a little bit, because we're already 3/4 of an hour into this, I have just copied across the main page and the CSS for my main page as well. Let's make these names consistent. So I'll give you a couple of minutes highlight of what the key parts are, and then we will make some changes to this as we go. So let me just update this to main.css. How about we render this first, and I'll go through it. So I want to render the template for main.html on my main page. So if I go to a web browser and we go to main, all right, this is what we've got. And you'll see that it looks like the screenshot that I showed you earlier on. And you can see I've got hover over effects on my names. I've got hovers on my buttons. I've got some placeholder texts. All right, they don't do anything yet because we haven't programmed any of that. probably quite useful to see if I just take out the line that does the CSS. Let me show you what the difference is. So if I refresh this, all right, it's not pretty, but it is functional. You see we've got our tasks for heading person 1, a heading for folders, a button for new folder, and then here's the list of all our folders, our settings and logout button, and then a heading for items, a new item button, and then here's our summary for an item, another summary, another summary, and then here's the form and some buttons. So it would be functional, and so we've got all of our content here in our HTML, but it's not pretty. So let's put the CSS back. So how have I got this organized? If I collapse the key parts, I've got my page header, which has another div for title bar, and then I've got my container, and inside my container I have 3 main divs for folders, items, and main. And so if I save and refresh, right, in the CSS, that represents my 3 columns here: folders, items, and main. And you can see that happening in the CSS. Where are we? Oh yeah, there's a couple of other things I'll show you here. So folders, grid area equals folders, and then my items has a grid area of items, and my main has a grid area of main. So I've used what's known as the CSS grid to set this up as 3 columns, and that is all inside that container. So where was the container? Container is here, and you see here it's displayed as a grid, 3 columns, 1 fraction, 2 fractions, and 50%. So basically this is saying I want the main section to take up 50% of the page, and then whatever is left, 1 of the 3 fractions can go to the folder, and then 2 of the 3 fractions can go to the item summary column. All right, so basically 1/3 of the remainder, 2/3 of the remainder. A gap between my columns, I want this to take up full 100% of the height. And so then here I define my grid template areas. So this is all called CSS grid. And that's what you're wanting to Google when you're wanting to figure this out. The other thing that I'll show you here is I've set up a different rule for the container when the width of the screen is up to 800 pixels. And here I've said I only want 1 column, and it goes over the 3 rows. So what this does is allows for when I'm on a mobile, right, if I go to less than 800 pixels, it will suddenly flick to give me my folders, and then my items, and then my main as 1 column. It's definitely not as functional as it could be. I would want to adjust these scroll bars so that kind of had all the folders and then all the items and then probably the menu underneath that. And actually, even more realistically, what you'd want is folder taking up everything. You click on a folder, then items take up everything. You click on an item, and then the form take up everything. But yeah, that's how you define different rules for different media. All right, so that is there. Was there anything else that I should point out? So we need to go through, we're going to need to change all of this change parts of it so that it comes from our data, right? Replace all this placeholder content with stuff that's actually coming from our database. So yeah, I think we're at the point where we can actually, let's get some of that happening. Right, and so this is now where we need to learn what's called Jinga 2. Jinga 2 is a templating language that is part of Flask, and it allows us to change the content of our HTML based upon values that we provide in Python. So I'm going to show you the most basic example of just, here's a variable, show it in the HTML. So let's start with person name. Instead of person name, I'm going to put in open curly brace, and then inside here I'm going to say user.name, close curly brace, close curly brace. If I save that and come back to my server, all right, before I render the template, I want to create this user object. And so I'm going to use a Python dictionary. User is equal to open close curly braces, and here I'm going to define a few things. So let's give it a name, and what else? What was the other one on my user ID? User ID. Let's just call it that. Actually, I really should show you this just working with a string first. So, yeah, let's do that. So let's just do basically whatever I add to my render template function call. If I just say person name, person name equals hello, right? This person name then becomes available inside my HTML. So if I go to my main, right, because it's saved as in the templates folder. So here, if I say person name, right, that variable, well, let's close this. I don't need that right now. I don't need that right now. I don't need that right now. Okay. Yeah, so this variable gets passed by Flask, and will be automatically, its contents will be automatically inserted wherever I refer to it inside these double curly brackets. So let's show you this in action. So if I come back here, task for person name, refresh, right, tasks for hello. So what I had was user.name, and that is because here I created a Python dictionary called user, and so I'm just going to say user is equal to user. All right. Now that looks a little confusing because I've used the same name. All right, but basically I'm saying take this dictionary called user and assign it to a variable called user inside the HTML template renderer. And so now the .name will get me this, and the if I did user ID, it will give me that. And so we're going to create a few of these. Let's make up some folders. So folders is equal to computer science, economics, English, history. Rather than being inventive, I'm just reproducing the ones I already had. All right, so if that's my folders, you can probably guess what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to say folders is equal to folders. Now, how can I, so this is a Python list, which I'm passing into a single variable. Now, inside my HTML, I want to iterate through that list. And so we know how to do this in Python, or at least I'm assuming you do. How can we do it in a Jinga 2 templating? It just so happens there is a for loop built into it. It's kind of styled like the Python one, but because it's inside the HTML, we need all these special symbols to indicate that this is going to be a templating insert. So wherever we're wanting to use a command structure, such as an if statement or a for loop, inside the Jinga 2, it is curly brace %, just to be obtuse. So inside this, I'm going to say for folder name in folders. All right, so this part is kind of what we would do inside Python. There's no colon at the end though. And then I'm going to say end for, which is not very Python-y, but anyway. And so what do I want to happen? I'm going to take one of these divs and put it inside this for loop. I'm going to indent it just because I will. And so what do I want to show inside here? I want it to show the folder name. All right, so instead of the template of folder name, the placeholder text, right? I just want the variable, and so it's double curly brackets and folder name. All right, so the command constructs are curly braces %signs, and just accessing a variable is double curly braces. So if I save that and go back and render it, we'll see here we've got comp.sci, economics, English, history, math, science, folder name, folder name, folder name, folder name. And that's because I've still got a bunch of these here. So let's get rid of the other ones I don't need anymore. All right, we're running through our for loop. Fantastic. Now, instead of just being a div here, we need to actually change this. I want it to be a link, so that I can jump to different folders. I might worry about that later on. All right, my items. So I've got all my item previews. So let's set these up with my Jinga library as well. And what am I doing here? Okay, so I want this to be for all of my tasks. So I'm going to give it a task folder. So curly braces %. Oops, percent's not dollars. Okay, so for task in tasks, and then I'm going to need an end for on that. Oh, come on, type. Okay, this is one task, so let's put that inside there and get rid of all the other preview ones. Right. Okay, so I'm going to put here task.title and task.preview, and then this one is going to be task.due. And I want to change my div tag here. So instead of being a div, I'm going to make this an anchor tag because I want to be able to click on it and have it show my task. So change that, change the closed div to also match the A. And then I'm going to give it a href where I'm going to set the folder ID to a value, which will be folder ID, and I'm going to set the task ID to a value, which will just be task.id. So yeah, let's come back up here and fix this one up as well that I mentioned I was going to want to change. So this is going to be also change this one to an A, an anchor tag. And so when I click on it, I want it to say folder ID is equal to folder ID. Yeah, this is going to be, I need the folder ID number. That's right, I'm doing this slightly differently to what I've got on my thing. I'm going to do folder, that's for folder in folders. Sorry for changing it on you. Folder.id and folder.name. We'll give it an ID and a name. That will work better. Okay, so for folder in folders, which means I need to change this so that every folder has an ID. Alright, so this is going to be a list of dictionaries. That's going to look like this. Okay, let's just copy, put a comma there, and we'll just, what do I need? One, make a few of them. Economics, English, history, math, and science. I wonder how long this project's going to take me entirely to make this video. Alright, let's see if that's working. Okay, that works. And that one's not, well, because I haven't given it task information. Now, if you notice down, let's make sure this is appearing on the video. It's not. Let me just lift this. Oh, yeah. Down the bottom here, when I hover over my folders, you'll see there that it says localhost main brackets, sorry, question mark folder ID equals, and that it changes as I move up and down. So there's that folder ID being properly rendered. Okay, let's get some sample tasks in here. So let's just cheat. I actually have some demo data which I will copy across and also make available. Alright, so I've just got a CSV file here which I've opened up into Excel. I've got an ID, a folder ID, a title, preview, a due date. Alright, so I've just made up some assignments in here. Except, let's change this folder ID to 1. So yeah, close that. So let's bring in that CSV file, which means I need to import the CSV library. Come down here and let's just do with open demo.csv as file. Items is equal to a list using the built from using the CSV dictionary reader. From that file with a delimiter of commas. So wherever the comma is, we're going to split onto a new. And then I should just be able to do tasks is equal to items. If I save that and come back to this and reload. Hey, there we go. No such file or folder, demo.csv. Because I put it inside the static folder by mistake. Let's drag that back into the correct folder and try that again. And there we go. And I've got some sensors. I've got some tasks, some items. And you can see down here at the bottom, it's rendering the correct link with the ID. Oh, except the folder ID is not. Okay, yeah, because I've got that in the CSV, so let's just pull it from there. Task.folder ID, I think it was. That's better. Yeah, they're all in folder 1. Okay, but clicking on them doesn't do anything, but you can see here that when I do click on history, it says folder ID 4. And so within Python, we'll be able to now access that field, that value. Same if I click on these, we can see we're setting a folder ID and an ID value. All right. It's just that at the moment Flask is ignoring them, but that's all working. Okay. Oh, one other thing that we'll do is let's just make it so that when we go to the home page, it takes us to the login page. Or actually, no, we'll worry about that later, because we'll make it when we are logged in, it'll take us to tasks, and when we're not logged in, it'll take us to the login. That's what we need it to do. But for now, we've got /main, and that's working fine. Okay, we are now moving on to the next stage. So now we've got this working with demo data. We haven't set up the we haven't set up the Jinga for this yet. Maybe I should do that. Let's make the database first. So DB browser SQLite, new database, find your project folder, video, tasker.db. Okay, and I am going to want a tasks table, and what needs to go inside that, I am going to need. Okay, so what have I created here with my database? So I've just copied across my previous one. I have three tables. I've got an accounts table, I've got a folders table, and I've got a tasks table. So if I look into each of these, I'll go into modify table and just talk through what I've got. So in accounts, this is going to be my user accounts. I have 5 fields, all of them called of type text, user ID, password, salt, email, and name. And the user ID, I have this PK ticked, so that's for a primary key. So that's saying that this is going to be the field that will uniquely identify one record within my accounts table. So as you create this, you add new columns to it. The program will automatically adjust the SQL code down the bottom. You don't need to worry about that. I'll just get rid of that one. Okay, so once this is set up right, you've got the names, the types, and the tick boxes. You click OK. If I look at folders, what have I got in there? I've just got user ID, user ID, ID, and name. They are all of type text, and I've got the PK box ticked on the user ID and the ID. So I'm saying for all of the folders, to uniquely identify a single folder, it's going to be the folder's ID plus the user ID. And so that's going to allow multiple people to use my program and set up their own folder structure, because I'm saying that all the folders are going to be unique based upon a combination of the user ID as well as the folder ID. And then finally my tasks table, if I modify that, there's a whole bunch of fields in here. Right, they are all text except for priority, which I created as an integer, and the primary key here I've got as ID. Really, that should also have user ID ticked, but they are all text. All right, so I've got user ID, folder ID, so the folder that the task belongs to, and then the ID of the individual task, its title, its due date. We're storing it as text, mainly because SQLite doesn't really support dates very well. If we were using a different SQL system, then I would use the built-in date system. A reminder date, a created date, so these are all going to be dates. Category is just going to be text, priority is an integer, status will be text, notes will be text, link will be text. All right. So ideally you wouldn't try to you'd try to use better types than just making everything text, but for now, beginner project, we can live with it. All right, let's click OK on that. So I've got some sample data in here. So under accounts, I suggest you create a demo account for yourself. All right, so you can see here I have my username, password at the moment. This is just available here in clear text. We will worry about the security aspect of this later. We will use what's known as hashing to, it's not, technically it's not encrypting the password, but it will turn it into an unreadable code. And that's when we will also use this salt column. All right, so that's when we look at the security aspect of how to secure our passwords. And then just an email address and the person's name. And here I've created all my folders and I've given them folder IDs. So I should match the IDs that, well, actually it won't matter because my task data is also set up the same. So, but yeah, ID, I mean, I've used numbers here, but I'm going to use text later on because I'm going to use a thing called a UUID for the IDs when I create them in the program. So yeah, it doesn't matter. These can be text labels, they can be whatever you want, that's fine. And then obviously the pretty name, the name that we actually want displayed in the web page. Right, and you need to make sure the user ID matches. If I had a different user ID here, then it wouldn't appear when I'm logged in as myself. And then some tasks, I've created some task data as well. Make sure these user IDs match something that exists. Again, the IDs, they just all need to be unique. You can see here, this is what a UUID will look like. I've created one in this sample data. This is when I was building this separately earlier, pre-video. And you can see I've got titles and due dates. With your dates, this is what's known as the ISO format, the International Standard Organization format. So it's 4-digit year, and then a hyphen, and then a 2-digit month, and then a hyphen, and then a 2-digit day. Make sure you structure your dates that way. Categories, priorities, status, notes, links, which I've just left blank. Right, once you've got your database set up, how do we actually get Python to read it? That's what we really want to get on to. So let's come back to our project. All right, so we need to import in SQLite 3, and we're also going to import also from date time import date time. So that's going to, we'll use that for the date functionality later on. Yeah, okay. So let's come down here, and so we want to read our user information, our folder information, and our items from the database instead of doing this. So I'm going to create a global field. Tend to try and avoid doing this. There's better ways of doing this, but again, for a beginner project, this is okay. So I'm just going to say tasker.db. So this is the name of my database. All right, so I'm going to create two functions, one for reading to the database from the database and one for writing to the database. So define database write, and this is going to receive an SQL command, which stands for structured query language, which is the language that we use for writing and reading databases. And I'm going to have a second parameter called data, but have a default value of none for it. And right now, let's just make it return none or 0. And we'll do database read. And that's also going to have an SQL string. And that will be, yeah, I might add a data parameter to it later on. And I'll just also have that return an empty list. Right, because the database write, I'm going to have it return an integer telling me how many rows got edited in the database when I made the change, and then the read is going to return me a list of dictionaries of all the records that I've read from the database. So let's just quickly code this up. This just comes from researching documents. Again, I do not have this memorized. You just have to plow your way through the documentation, figuring out how the library, whoever wrote the library, what they expected it to, the workflow that they designed it to require. So to write to the database, we start off by creating a connection variable. And so from my SQLite 3 library, I use the connect function, and I want to connect to my database file. So my database file name, and then I'm going to use what's known as a row factory. This is something that took me ages to figure out. This is the thing that will give me back the dictionaries, my list of dictionaries. That's so SQLite 3.row. And then I want my actual cursor, which is different to my connection. So the cursor is basically a thing that points to a record within the database. And I hate it when that happens. All right, so connection equals SQL3Lite connect. My file name goes there, and then connection.row factory equals SQL3Lite row. DB for database is equal to connection.cursor, and that's a function, so that needs parentheses. Rows affected, so I'm going to start off by assuming that I haven't made any changes, and then I'm going to return that. So let's make some changes. If the data has been provided, then I'm going to do something. I'm going to provide it to the execute function, and if it hasn't, then I won't. Basically, so if data exists, if it's not none, then rows affected is going to be equal to db.execute, whatever my SQL string is, my data. So this has to be a tuple, which is something we'll worry about in a little while, and then I'll get the row count. So how many rows got affected by this SQL being executed. If data has not been set, then I'm just going to do rows affected is equal to db.execute just the SQL by itself, row count, and actually I don't need this equals 0 because rows affected is getting overwritten either way. And that's my database write function, except we need to now close our connection. So connection is, we want to commit it to the file, and then we want to close our cursor and close our connection. Again, there are better ways of doing this. Ideally, we would have one shared connection that was being used across all of our different threads. I'm just keeping it simple right now. Ideally, we'd be using a different database to SQLite. But yeah, this is good for experimenting and learning purposes. So my read function is going to be fairly similar. So I'm actually, let's just take some of this, copy, paste. Okay. I might as well set it up with this data straight away. Okay, so this db.connection stays the same. Instead of rows affected though, we just execute the SQL. I don't want the row count. What I want is to fetch all the records that the execute command read. So that's just records is equal to db.fetchAll. So fetch everything that got read by the execute command. And now instead of a commit, I want to turn this into my rows. So rows is equal to, I'm going to use a list generator. Take each record and turn it into a dictionary. And so that's going to be for every record in records. All right, so for loop through this list, all right, where each record is called, and assign each one a temporary variable called record, and then I'm going to be taking that record, turn it into a dictionary, and then the list of dictionaries is going to get called rows. So here, return rows. And that will read my database. So if I save that, let's actually use it. So let's test it on this folders thing, right? And so instead of doing this, we're just going to do folders is equal to database underscore read, and I need to provide an SQL command. Again, I'm deliberately not using an object relational mapper library like SQL Alchemy. If you read about that, you'll see that it's quite common, but it's a Python only library. And I'd rather you get a core understanding of SQL databases in a language agnostic way. So SQL works regardless of whether you're writing in Python or Java or JavaScript programs. So SQL is its own separate language. And I mean, all of the different languages have popular relational object relational mapping libraries. SQL Alchemy is the Python one that's quite popular. I'd rather you learn some basics of SQL before worrying about those. So that's why I'm sticking to SQL languages specifically. So anyway, select everything, so all the fields from my folders table, and we'll order it alphabetically by name. So yeah, this is a separate language called SQL. So if you search SQLite, Lite SQL language reference. Okay, yeah, SQLite.org has some reference documents here. It's probably not the best. I'll see if I can find a good one. I'll post it in the description. Anyway, let's go back to this. So this should hopefully load my folders. Let's go back and see if this still works. And it does. All right, let's prove that it's reading it from my database. So if I come into my database and change my folders, let's change comsci to computer science, apply, write changes, come here, refresh, computer science. Okay, so that's reading from my database. Brilliant. All right. I only want it to read where the account name matches mine, but we'll worry about that when we secure it later on. What we need now is, let's load the items preview. So items is equal to database read. Select all fields from tasks, where folder ID is equal to something. Now, SQL, these whenever you're referring to a text or providing like a text value or a string value, it must be single quotes. So unlike normally in Python, you can use single quotes or double quotes for a string. Inside the SQL, it has to be single quotes, which will then mean you will want to use double quotes on your Python strings so that you can have single quotes within it. Now I'm going to make this an F string so that I can put inside here folder ID. Now, folder ID does not yet exist, so let's create it. And let's say folder ID equals 3. Well, actually, I'm using strings. All right, so this is going to select all the items from my database where folder ID is equal to 3, and we'll do that instead of my CSV reader. Now, if I refresh this, all my items disappeared because I don't have anything with a folder ID of 3. If I come to my database and edit a task, and let's see, I've got this econs test with a folder ID of 1. So how about we come back to this and let's make a folder ID of 1, refresh, there's my econs test. Now how can I make it so when I click on the folder I get the actual list that I'm wanting? Alright, so this is a new part of Flask. We need to be able to receive these variables, these fields that we're setting inside our HTML. So when I click these, I can see this in Flask. Right, and so the way to do that inside my Flask is I need to import the request module from Flask, and then I come down to my main and I say if there's a folder ID in request.values. So request.values will have all the fields that have been sent from the browser through that URL, on the end of the URL there. So if folder ID is in it, then I'm going to update my own copy of folder ID to whatever is coming from request.values, the folder ID. And so now to refresh, all right, folder ID is 2, folder ID is 1, folder ID is 0, and that is working very nicely. All right, and so it's as simple as that to read it. So now let's make it so when I click on an item, it updates all of these as well. So if that's my folder ID, then let's just create a quick let's default to 0 and 1, shall we? So default to 0 there, and for our ID let's default that to 1. But if ID is in request.values, then ID is going to be set to request.values ID. And so let's load up the main task that we want to be viewing. All right, so our main task database read fstring. Select from tasks where folder, let's just do where ID is equal to single quotes, close those single quotes. All right, now this is going to return a list of a dictionary. If the ID matches, so if the length of the main task is 1, then let's just replace main task with the first entry from the list. If it doesn't, then there was some kind of problem. Let's just set it to an empty dictionary. All right, and then here now we can just do main task is equal to main task. Let's also provide the folder ID while we're at it. Folder ID is equal to folder ID, and the task ID number is equal to the task ID number. Okay, so all those fields will now be available to me inside my HTML Jinga 2 rendering library. So I need to update my main. So that, let's open up this code that I had collapsed and closed. All right, and so I need to put all my fields in here. Let's just collapse that so I can see everything. So, all right, so name is equal to title. So these are all my field names. So this, the value of this is just going to be main task dot title. All right, so whatever the field name is inside my database, so title. So let's just test that that works, shall we? Save that, go back to my web browser, refresh. And okay, and it says econs test. And if I click on one of these other ones, right, we can see here it is updating this text box with whatever I click on. Fantastic. Okay, so now I need to do that to all the other fields. So what have I got? I've got my due date. So input type due date value is going to be equal to main task.due. Oops. Remainder is going to be main task.remainder. Created main task.created. Category. Oh, this is gonna, yeah, this is gonna be interesting. We're gonna have to, value is equal to main task dot category. This is not quite going to work the way you think it will yet on these drop down boxes. Main task priority. Kudos to anyone who is actually watching this far. We are 1 hour and 32 into this project. Give yourself a pat on the back. I hope you've paused at some point and given yourself a break. You've probably noticed I've had a couple of jump cuts where I've been doing that. Value is equal to, and it's getting darker outside. Main task dot status. I should stop and have dinner soon. Main task text area notes. So I want to get rid of all this placeholder lorem ipsum stuff. How much did I put here? There we go. There's all the text area, and that is going to be main task dot notes. Is there any others? Oh yeah, I need to add some hidden fields as well. All right, I want to send, anytime I click save on these changes, I want to send back the ID of the task. And I want to send back the folder ID and my user ID, although later on I'll be storing that on the back end in the server. So we need to create some hidden inputs, and that is just input type equals hidden. Right, and so they're things that exist in the HTML, but they don't actually appear in the browser. And so I'm going to have my ID and give it a value of main task.id. Let's just copy and paste this a couple of times. All right, so also hidden for the folder ID is going to be main task dot folder ID, and then user ID will be whoever I'm logged on as. So I'm actually going to put here user ID. Yeah, and I'm going to change this as well. I'm going to make this folder ID be because I'm passing that as a separate field. The reason why is so when I'm creating a new task later on, I want to know what folder I've currently got open to save the new task to, and that's also why. So I actually do want a folder ID even if it's a new task, and so that way this field will always be set. So let's see what this does. Okay, I've got a whole bunch of values here, and if I click on them, they should change. But you'll notice that the category, status, and priority are not changing, because we actually need to. The way the select drop-down boxes work in HTML is whichever one you want to be preset as the default needs the magic word selected as an attribute on the relevant option. Right. So now if I go back, we'll see that the status will be set to in progress on every task. So I need a way of being able to set the word selected there for whichever one, for whatever matches for that particular task. And so we use something similar to the Python if generator. So we'll just do this for one and then copy and paste it. Okay, so I want to print the string selected is equal to selected. Actually, it just needs to say selected, doesn't it? Because that's what was working. So I want that string to output if main task dot category is equal to something. Else be an empty string. Right? And what do I want it if it's equal to? This. So homework. So if main task category is set to homework, print the string selected at this location, otherwise have an empty string. And so if I copy and paste this into these two, and then I just change it to summative assignment and summative test. Do we want it? We don't need the word summative. We know that assignments, and I think that's what I've already done in the database as well. And where's the database? Yeah, I just called it assignment, homework, and test. Let's just stick with that. So let's get rid of the word summative out of all this. That's just going to scare us off. Okay, and then do the same with priority. So copy one of these, paste it in, update it so that instead of category, it is priority. And the priority is an integer, so I don't need the string there. I just need the one. And now let's copy and paste that again into the other two. And update that to number 2 and number 3. And now do the same for my status. So this is main task status is equal to unstarted. The word of the day. If you've been watching this far, prove to me you've been watching this far. Come to me in class and say the magic word. The magic word unicorns. I don't know. There you go. So if you've been watching this far, 1 hour 39 minutes in, come to class and say unicorns. All right, let's see if that works. Priority changed to 2. Yeah, okay, so there we go. Our categories, our status, and our priorities are now changing. Yeah, you deserve a gold star if you've been watching this far. Okay. So that's reading from our database and it's updating our fields. We are getting onto the homeward stretch. Honestly. I mean, we don't have our login or logout yet. We've still got to secure everything. But we're reading from a database. So now let's make it so that we can save to a database. Actually, I'm just going to pause and have a quick drink. All right, we are back. The old throat was getting quite parched there. So we are ready to write to our database. Let's remind myself how to do that. So yeah, we're about an hour 40 into this, and I can tell you it probably took me 2 or 3 times longer to actually make it this far the first time. So I say that to mean, yeah, it takes time to learn all this, and yeah, I had to look up a lot of documentation and remind myself on different things as I was building it. All right, let's get let's save changes to a task, shall we? So I've got my main. I'm going to make another function. App route save underscore task. And I'm going to add an attribute here called methods equals a Python list post. All right, so this is saying I want to accept a HTTP post request here. And so we'll just call this task update. And so everything that gets sent from the HTML form, let's turn it into a dictionary. All right, so everything that's in our request values, turn it into a Python dictionary and assign it the field, the variable form. And let's just check that we receive this. So if we print form information received, let's just print it out and show you what happens here. Yeah, what are we going to return? Let's just return okay for now. Okay, so if I save on this, well, actually, I need to make it go to save task first. So let's check my HTML and see what I've put in here, because I can't remember. Yeah, I don't have anything. So I need, my action needs to say go to save task. All right, and you see I've already got method equals post. So send it to this web address, save. So now I will have a save task. All right, method not allowed because I'm actually doing a get request. When you do it through the browser yourself, the method is called get. So that's fine. But the form should do a post. So let's just load up something here, click save update, and I've got my OK. Let's take a look at what has printed out here. And we can see form information received. All right, and so I've just got a Python dictionary with all my fields from the HTML form. Folder ID 0, created, notes, submit save, which was the save button. The reminder wasn't set. The status was called in progress. The due date, the user ID, the ID. So you can see here those hidden fields were all sent as well. Priority, title, category. So now I can work with this dictionary and save it in my database. So I've got here, I've actually got 3 different buttons. Right, I want to be able to delete a task. I want to be able to mark it as closed. I haven't used a status as closed. I want people to have to click the button to make it closed. But status is then how I'm going to do it. I'm going to set status to closed, but I just didn't want to be able to do it through a drop-down list. Just something different. And then normal save update. So to do all of that, let's see. So if submit close. All right, so if I've got, you see here I've got submit save, all right, because each of these buttons has got a different name. So if submit close is in my form, all right, so if that field exists, then that means that was the button that was clicked. And so I'm going to set the status field in my form to completed. And what I will do is I'm going to update here my items list, right, so that it shows all the items from that folder ID, and let's make sure I get this syntax correct. Yeah, and status not equal to completed. And so that will mean it will still exist in the database, but it won't show up in that previews list. And we can do things later on where, to view completed items as well. But yeah, we're not deleting it from the database. We're just marking it as completed, so it won't show in our to-do list as something that we have to do. All right, so let's say, so we're updating our status to completed, and then we want to save it. But we also need to be able to do for new items. So if we've got a new task, then it's not going to have an ID. So let's figure out if we have an ID. Let's just make it a local variable because we're going to be using it a lot. So form ID is equal to ID. We'll do the same with folder. Folder ID is equal to form folder ID. Let's just bring them into our local namespace. So if the ID is empty, then that means new task. Else, all right, existing task. So here I'll put pass here for now. We'll come back to sorting out the new later on. So if it's an existing task, then the SQL, we need to figure out what the SQL is going to be to save changes to my existing task. And then I'm going to do my database write. I'm going to send the SQL and all the form data to the write function, since I made it be able to take a data attribute. And then, yeah, if OK is equal to 1, then that means it successfully saved the task. So we can return and redirect, which we need to import. Redirect. Where do we want to go? Once we've saved, we want to just reload the page. So let's just go back to main and say folder ID is equal to, this needs to be an F string. Folder ID is equal to folder ID, and ID is equal to ID. All right, so go back to where we came from. If we didn't make a change, then that means there was an error, and so we will redirect to an error page of some kind, which we will have to make. Let's just make a quick placeholder for that. At app.route error, define error page, return there was an error. All right, we can fix that up later on. So we need to do this SQL. And that's where, like I said, SQL is yet another language. I mean, that's the thing. In this project, we've done Python, we've done HTML, we've done CSS, we've done Jinga 2, we've done SQL. So we're using 5 different languages in this one project. So you can see how the complexity, when you get beyond trivial little projects can start to become exponential. All right. Yes, juggling 5 different languages in your head at once is a complex beast. Okay, and that's why you have good reference documents. And when you find references online that work for you, bookmark them and treat them as gold. All right, have a well-organized set of bookmarks for all the different languages, so that when you find a good website, you can go back to it again and again and again. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how this works. We're going to update tasks, and I want to set the title to equal to title. All right, and so equal sign colon. So the way this is going to work is, how about I just type it all out first? Due is equal to due. Reminder is equal to reminder. Category is equal to category. What am I doing? Priority is equal to priority. Status is equal to status. Notes is equal to notes. Comma, comma, comma. Link is equal to link. Where ID is equal to colon ID semicolon. Okay. So what this is doing is, this is a syntax inside the SQLite parser. So this is saying, set this field in my database to this field in the dictionary that I'm parsing. All right, so set this field in my database to this field in my dictionary. But only, so update all the field, all the titles inside tasks that match this constraint. So we don't want to update every task. We only want to do it where the ID matches. So that's what that where clause is for. All right, so that should work. Except I don't actually have the link in my field in my HTML. So I'm just going to, it was something that I created thinking, oh yeah, it would be good to have a URL link for each task, but I didn't get around to adding it to my HTML. We can worry about that later. So I'll just create it so that it exists. Otherwise this will crash and say link doesn't exist. But now, hopefully, if I refresh this, let's change the title. This is a new title, and here are some new notes. And let's just change the, actually created, I set that as read only. Let's change the due date. Let's make it due in a couple of days' time. Save update. And that updated there. So what that means, all right, there's all my changes. If I look inside my database and refresh, this is a new title. Here are some new notes. Okay, so that worked. Woohoo! We need to make new button work, and we need to be delete button to work. So, actually, yeah, if I close this, that should now disappear. And it did. All right, because we had that SQL up here where we said not to show status where status is completed. If I want it to reappear, if I refresh this, I can change the status from completed and set it back to, I don't know, in progress. Right changes. Okay, so now it should reappear. And it does. Okay, let's make the deletes work. If submit delete was in the form. All right, when you're doing things like deletes, you would normally want to have a prompt, are you sure? We're not going to bother with that right now. Living dangerously. Delete from tasks. Okay, you don't want to delete all your tasks, so delete only where the ID is equal to ID. And then return redirect. Let's just go to main for that folder. So folder ID, we can't go to the task because it no longer exists. But we can go back to that same folder. I don't really want to delete anything. Let's all right. Yeah, I've got a copy of this database, so that's fine. Let's delete this test. Delete, and it's gone. And if I look at my database, so where is it? Here, unit 2 test. If I hit refresh, it's gone. Yeah. Okay. So delete works. So all 3 buttons work. I've got save, I've got complete and close, cancel and delete. Let's make the new buttons work. Then we need to do logins, secure the passwords, and upload onto the web. We're almost at the 2-hour mark. Let's see if I can do this in less than 3 hours. Should be doable. Okay. And I still haven't had dinner. What is it? It's 8 o'clock at night. And my mind is starting to wander. What am I doing? I'm doing the new. Okay. So, new task. There's a noisy vehicle outside. So the ID, I said I was going to use UUIDs for that. So let's import that library. Import UUID. And so UUID is a globally recognized standard for generating random numbers that won't collide with each other. As in theory, no 2 UUIDs will ever be the same. It's a theory. It's not perfect, but yeah, there's underlying science behind it. Which, yeah. So if ID is blank, let's create a UU. We want to convert it to a string. UUID. Move the mouse pointer out of the way. Dot UUID1. So UUID is formed. UUID of type 1 is formed in 2 parts. The first part comes from the MAC address of your network card, which is a unique serial number for your network card. It does mean the UUID identifies which computer created it, but it means it will come only from that computer, and no other computer. Any UUID that comes from another computer will never, it means it can never clash. And then the second half of it comes from a timestamp, so the time that the UUID was created. And so provided you're not generating UUID1 at the same instant in 2 different threads on your computer, then there should be no 2 UUIDs of type 1s that are ever the same. That's the theory. All right. So we're going to set that in the form in the dictionary data. Let's just put it in there. And we need to do the create our link field as well. And then we just do our SQL. So let's take this, copy it, paste it. But the SQL to create a new task, a new record, is structured quite differently. So we're gonna have to rewrite this string. But the rest of it can stay the same. So this is an insert into tasks. And then the way the insert command works is you give it a list of all the fields and then values, and then a list of all the values that you want for those fields. So the fields will be user ID, folder ID, the task ID, title, the due date, the remainder, created, category, priority, status, notes, and link. I might make this a triple quote so I can do a multi-line string. Insert into tasks, values. All right. And since my dictionary names are the exact same, I can just paste that, and then I put the colons in front of each one so that it does the lookup. Otherwise it won't, without the colon it won't do the lookup. Right, that should, so if the ID doesn't exist, when I click save, that will create a new field. Now a new task. The trouble is at the moment, the ID field does exist for everything because when I click on a task, it's updating all of these fields, including the ID. So ID is never blank. So I need a way to make an ID blank, and I want that to happen when I click the new button. I want to blank all of these out. And so that's where we're going to actually use a little bit of JavaScript. And so let's go into my main, and if I scroll down, I need to, why is that not aligned? We need to create a HTML page, a JavaScript page inside my static folder, and let's just call that main.js, and make my main HTML load it, so which is why I just opened that up. So to load the JavaScript, I tend to make this the last tag before the closing body tag, and it's just script type is equal to text/JavaScript, source is equal to /static main.js. Close the tag. So that's saying go off to this file and load this JavaScript. All right, let's get my JavaScript up and running. So when I create a new task, I want this to happen when I click on the new button that's inside items. So let's find where that is in my HTML. All right, here I've got a button object, class, icon, new. Now I might give this an ID because it'll make it a little easier in the JavaScript. So in general, classes can apply to multiple things, whereas ID should be unique just to this element inside the HTML. So I'm going to give this an ID of new task button. And while I'm here, I might as well do the same for the new button that's in the folders. ID is equal to new folder button. Save, and let's go to my JavaScript. Right, so to capture that button, actually the first thing I do, the top of every JavaScript file, put a little string that says use strict, and that just activates a safer mode for your JavaScript file. Strict definitions. All right. Document.query selector, capital S on selector, and inside the string hashtag indicating I want to get an ID. So find me an element with an ID that matches. So the ID I'm looking for is new task button. Oops, not query. Yeah, I want query selector. And I want to add an event listener. So I want to listen for when something happens to this piece of HTML that has ID new task button. What event do I want to listen for? I want to listen for a click event. And when that click event happens, I want to run some JavaScript, which I can call new task. Right, and so this will run a JavaScript function called new task. So I better create a function called new task. And that's function, new task, parentheses. There will be some a parameter that gets passed to it by the event listener. So we'll just put all that information into a parameter called event. And okay, so JavaScript functions go inside curly braces to denote the start and the end of it. All right, and so what do I want to happen when I click on new task? I want to set all of these form fields to empty values. And so query selector is the way that I get all my HTML. I say get inside my HTML document. I want to query it and find this thing that matches. And these selection rules are the same as the ones that work inside CSS. All right, so if I do document.query selector, and so here I can say name is equal to title. Right, and so this is saying wherever there's inside my HTML, if there's something that has name equal title in it, right, which I've got here, then this is going to match. And I want to set its value to nothing. So I just need to do this for all the fields in that form. So I paste a bunch of this. Right, I want to do it to the due date. Move the mouse pointer out of your way. I want to do it to the reminder. I want to do it to the created date. I want to do it to the category. Oh, that reminds me, we need to set the created dates because it's a read-only field. I want to do it to priority. I want to do it to status. I want to do it to notes. I want to do it to the ID field. Status, let's just set it to unstarted. Unstarted. Priority can be set to 1. Category, let's default that to homework. So let's put a comment here that we are clearing the form fields. If I save that and refresh, all right, if I click the new button, these should all go. Let's just, yeah, so here's a whole bunch of stuff. Click new. There you go. They all went. And now that means that ID should be empty. So I will execute the code for new. So let's just put something in here and save. And it's just been added to my list. I love it when it works. Refresh, there it is. And it's got a UUID, which got auto-generated. Except it doesn't have a created time. So let's do that. But we're going to do that in the Python rather than in JavaScript. And for the same reason as things like user ID later on, once we get the security in place. Where we don't have to trust the user, we prefer not to trust the user. All right, so form created is going to be set to, and I think we are already importing, yes, from datetime we're importing datetime. And you can see it's dark because we haven't used it yet. So where am I? Here. Form created equals datetime dot now dot stf. So create a string from time, strf time, create string from time. And I want this to be of format year month, day, with hyphens in between them. All right, capital on the Y for year, lowercase on the M, and lowercase on the D. If you had the lowercase on the Y, it would only be a 2-digit year. Capital M would be minutes instead of month, and I'm not sure what capital D would give you, but anyway, it's not what you want. Probably the day name. That should now hopefully, if I create another new task, save. Yeah, now I've got a created date. All right, this one doesn't. This one does. Happy Labor Day. All right. And yeah, if we look in my database, yeah, there's the date. Perfect. Alrighty. The new button for folders. I knew there was something else. All right, so this is going to work the same way. New folder button. All right, and we want to run a function called new folder. So function new folder. We're not actually using the event parameter, but it gets passed to us anyway, so we need to count for it. And this time we'll just do a pop-up box. What do you want to call the folder? So let name is equal to prompt name of new folder question mark. And so we will need that, and we will need the user ID, which, well, once we're logged on, the server will already know the user ID, but for now, let's just pass it back from the task. So let's just get the user ID from the field. So query document, query selector, document query selector, name is equal to user ID. Yeah, so we will ignore this on the server end later on. Dot value. So provided I've actually typed a name, so if name.length is bigger than 0, what do we want to do? We're going to have to create a form in the JavaScript and send it that way. So yeah, rather than, I mean, we could do a GET request. No, I'll do it this way. I'll show you how to use JavaScript to create its own fake form. So instead of creating a HTML form, we'll use JavaScript to create its own form in memory and just send it to Python. So let f for form equal new form data, and we're going to append a couple of fields to this form. So append user ID, whatever's in that user ID string, and f append a form name. A folder name can be whatever's inside that name field, and then we want to fetch. So fetch is the way of telling it JavaScript to visit a web address. So we're going to go to a new folder, which we'll have to create in Flask, and we want to send some parameters to it. The syntax for this bit is going to be a little obtuse for beginners. I do apologize. Method post, and then we want to attach the body of our fields, our form data, and then we need to process the response. So then get the response is going to be whatever's in the responses text. Once we get that, then we want to get that responses data and just print it to the console. New folder reply was data. Oh, and what we do want is to reload the web browser. It's a bit of a cheat, but we'll just force a refresh so that the new folder will appear. Otherwise, we will have created it, but we won't be seeing it because we're not actually getting our browser to reload otherwise. Yeah, this syntax is not beginner friendly. But this, yeah, I don't want to get bogged down in teaching you too much JavaScript syntax right now, so just deal with it. It's the basics. If you want to learn more JavaScript, please, by all means, I will create more videos separately. Okay, but we need to create this. Where are we? We need to create this new folder path inside our Flask. So let's deal with that. So inside here, app.route new folder, and this was methods. This is a post request. So define create new folder. All right, what are we doing with this? Let's remind myself. Yeah, okay. So let's get the form information as a dictionary again. So request dot values, and create an ID from the UUID library, UUID1. And make sure that that's in our form. So I'm putting this in the dictionary so that I can use the SQL function that will read dictionary fields. So my SQL is just going to be insert into folders, the user ID, the ID, and the name. The values will be user ID, ID, name, semicolon. Yeah, because if I didn't do that, then I could just do like an F string substitution in here instead. Right, but if I'm wanting to read it from the field of the form that I'm going to be passing to the write command, then it would have to be actually have to be in the dictionary. So yeah, okay is equal to database, right, send the SQL, and yeah, because I'm sending the form as a dictionary here for it to pass. All right. Yeah, and if okay was 1, then it worked. Return okay, else return error. And the reason I'm not doing anything else with this here is because this is what is going to get sent to the JavaScript function, and it's just printing it out on the JavaScript console. So that should work. Save that. New, refresh. Hit the new button. No, that's still not popping up. What have did I not save that? New folder button, add event listener, new folder. Let's make sure that that name matches in here. New folder button, that matches there. Yep, that matches. Let's just do a full refresh. New, okay, yeah, just hadn't reloaded properly. If you have troubles with the reloading not working properly, little pro tip. 2 hours and 20 minutes in before I give this tip anyway. Right click, go to inspect, and that's going to open up the Chrome DevTools and you can see here it's gone into phone preview mode, so I'll turn that off. But when this is up, you can right click on the reload button and you get empty cache and hard reload. Right, this menu only appears when you have the DevTools window open. So open that up and you can, that will allow you to properly reload everything from the cache, or clear the cache and do a proper reload. Okay, so yeah, oops, let's go back to everything just, but yeah, so now I've got new, what subject don't I have here? French. Okay. All right, so that has not, well, I didn't do a reload. Let's see if it's in the database. Go to folders, refresh. No, it's not there. And if I look in my console log here, response is not defined on main JavaScript line 27. So I've got an error in my JavaScript. Ah, yeah. Okay, so response is not, yeah. Okay, so that is, like I said, I mean, the syntax is a little obtuse at times. So because, yeah, these need to match anyway. But yeah, because this is the parameter that is being sent to a one-line function, and so response didn't exist. It was just res. So let's try that again. Reload it. New French. Okay. And now what have I done? Ah, here we go. New folder reply. 404 error. It wasn't found. Did I not save my changes to my? I did. So new underscore folder. Ah, new underscore folder. Helps if I spell things correctly. Save that. Third time's a charm. Okay. Reload. New French. No. Okay. Still got errors. Welcome to 101 in live debugging. Oh, what have we got going on here? Ah. So I've got an error in my Python. You can see here that it's printing out a Flask error message. So if I look in my Python, come on, which, I want this. Okay, yeah. Unrecognized token. I've got an SQL error. You insert in, so let's make sure. Folders, user ID, ID, name. User ID, ID, name. Let's print out what's in this form. Name, French, user ID. Yep. Unrecognized token. Oh. Because it's because of what I did here. Because I didn't put it in quotes like a normal string. When we do this, the field substitution method from the dictionary, it will automatically put the quotes around it if it's a string, and if it's an integer, it won't. And that's what I get for messing with what I previously had. That would fix it up. New. There we go. French now appeared. Okay. Which means it's in my database. Yep. So the new button works, the new items work, save works, complete works, delete works. We now are ready to get the logins working. Oops. Sorry, my index page. Okay, so new imports. Oops. We will import from Flask login. So this is a library that we're going to import to handle a lot of the login work for us. We don't need the CSV anymore. It just makes it a bit easier to just import in existing libraries that have been built with security in mind. So we're going to add a new configuration setting to our server called secret_key. Ooh, it's a secret. All right, and this just needs to be some random string. All right, basically this is what it will use to encrypt the session, or to cryptographically sign the session data that it sends back and forth to the browser to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. And then we're going to define a login manager, which is just going to be using Flask _login .login manager. Like I said, this is, all right, again, I'm just referring to my notes. And it's just stuff that I have pulled together from plowing through the documentation for the Flask login library. All right, reading their documentation as to the way they have written it intended to be used. It's not anything to do with memorizing or anything like that. I do need to create a class, and I'm not going to teach what object-oriented programming is all about here. Flask login .user mix, it's inheriting from Flask from a user mixin class. What is a class? Basically, this is us defining a simple way to think of it is us defining our own data type. So in the way we have integers, floats, booleans, strings, dictionaries, lists, I'm defining a data type called user. And in the same way that a string might have functions attached to it, like if I have a string called s and I do s dot, and there's all the different functions there, like to convert it to lowercase or uppercase, or pull out substrings, I can create functions that are attached to this data type called user, and it will perform operations on whatever data is stored within that particular instance of it. So if I have multiple different users, in the same way I can have multiple different strings. Right? When I do a convert to lowercase, it only affects that one particular string that I'm running it on. The same happens here. It would only affect the one particular user that I'm doing it on. That's like a 30-second introduction to a very complex field called object-oriented programming in computer science. So self.id is equal to user ID. Self.email is equal to email. If you want to learn more about object-oriented programming before the diploma, by all means, I'd love to teach you. Just let me know, assuming you're one of my students. I can't imagine too many people who are not one of my students getting this far into this video. Return. So I'm just going to return a dictionary, make a function to return a dictionary to give me some of these fields. It'll be handy later on. Self.id, email, self.email. So yeah, the ID, the email, and the name for this particular instance of a user, whoever it happens to be. All right, and that is my class done. Okay, now I need to use my login manager to create something that loads whichever user I am wanting to be. So this uses another decorator that's been built into the login management library. All right, again, yeah, just like the decorator for the app approach, it just came, figuring out how to do this just came from reading the documentation for the relevant library. So I'm going to do a database lookup to load whatever user I've got in a user ID that's been passed as a parameter here. So if I load from my users, load users from the database, read it up, select all the information from accounts where the user ID is equal to the user ID. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's put my single quotes in there. User ID. And it needs to be an F string. Okay. If of users, so if I actually get, if I don't get one back, then I'm going to return nothing. All right. Assuming I do get something back, then I need to create a user object based on that class, which is going to be, yeah, users. So remember, it's going to return a list of dictionaries. It's only got one item, but I need to get that first item from the list, and then the dictionary field of user ID. So I return the user ID. What have I got here? Okay, so based upon the order that I've got here, user ID, then email, then name. So user ID, then email, and then name. And I need to set user.id on it to the user ID, and I'll return that user. So whatever function I came from, return the user. Okay, I've got my database read, my database write. Okay, so my index page, if I'm not logged in, I want to go to login. And if I am logged in, then I can go to main. So let's do that. If Flask underscore login, all right, if the current user is authenticated, then I know I'm logged in. So in that case, I can return a redirect to main. Else, let's redirect to the login page, and then I don't need that. Oops. No module named Flask login, so I haven't installed that in the global space. Normally I wouldn't do this, but I'll just do it quickly now. Normally I'd have a virtual environment. All right, let's try that. Flask login should be able to be resolved now. Let's, okay, reload. Yeah, okay, that redirected me to login. And if I try to go to main, at the moment, it'll work. So I want to make it that I can't go to main if I'm not logged in. So let's go to main. Okay, and the way that I do this is between the app route and the define main page, I say at flask login, flask underscore login dot login underscore required. And now if I try to do this, it says I'm unauthorized. Ooh. All right, and so I want to do that to any page that requires a login. So I don't want people to be able to update a task if they're not logged in, and I don't want people to be able to create a folder if they're not logged in. Error message is fine. I think that's it. Log out. Well, if they try to go to log out, it's not gonna, yeah, all right, whatever. So let's make the logout work. That will just be Flask login. So I'm using the Flask login library, and it's just logout underscore user, and then I can just send them back to the home page. Like that. So the logout should work. Now I just need the login to work. And I'm going to create 2 copies of the login route. And I'm going to make one of them be for methods get, and the other one be for methods post. All right, so you remember I said get is the, and you've got to have different function names. So login page, login request. Okay, and now I've got to restart this. So yeah, make sure your function names change. So you remember I said get is what happens when I go to it via the web browser. All right, so that's the get one. And then when I click the login button, it'll go to the post. It'll send that form to the post. And so once I successfully log in, I'm actually going to redirect to main. But just to show you, the difference between the two. So the get versus the post. All right. Yeah, so if I refresh that, I'm still here. So this is the get one, the one that's doing the render template. And then if I click login, it goes to receive the form. Okay, so it gets pushed to here. So let's, like I've done with the other ones, let's get the form and turn it into a dictionary from request.values. And then look up my users data to see if that username and password are valid. So at the moment, if I go to my database and look inside my accounts, I'm just using clear text. So let's get it working for clear text first, and then we'll encrypt it later. So users is equal to a database read, select from accounts, where user ID is equal to user ID, and password is equal to password. And then I'm going to give it the form. So if the user ID and the password both match what's in the database, then I will get that person's record back. And if it doesn't, then I'm not going to get anything back. So if the length of the users received is equal to 1, then I've got the correct user. I've got the correct username and password because I've received that person's row from the database. So in that case, I need to create. I need to tell the Flask login system to log that person in. So to do that, I create a user object based upon that class. All right, and so this is the same as what I had up here. In fact, I can just use that load user. Let's do that. This isn't in my notes. We're living dangerously here. Load user form user ID. That should work. And then I can just do Flask login user and so now I can return a redirect. We can go to main and look at our tasks. Right? If we didn't get a user back, then we are going to return we'll go back to the login page, I guess. Ideally, we want to provide a an error message. All right, so go to login. All right, I click login and it keeps bringing me back to login. If I put in this is a test, it logs me in. All right. I haven't coded the logout button, but I do have. Yeah, so this is all working. But if I go to the logout path, it should log me out. Yeah. All right. Let's. Do we want a little error message when we log in? Yeah, so rather than redirecting to login, we can just render the login screen again and provide a message. Invalid user password. Please try again. All right, and so now I can just use my Jinga templating to, after the heading, let's put in, oops, okay. If alert doesn't equal nothing, so if it's been set, and if I keep doing that, p class is equal to alert, and that should do it. Okay, login, invalid username, please try again. Okay, so I've got this class alert. Let me just quickly go into my CSS. And how am I going to make this? What did I do? Alert. So dot alert for the class. And I'm going to copy and paste this in. I'm sorry. There we go. A nice red box. How's that? Beautiful. Except I don't want it all the time, so I am just going to just make it empty there. Yep, and so now that if statement only runs when it's not empty, and then yep, login. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. This is a test. Nope. This is a test. Okay, that works. Now we just need to make it more secure, because we don't want to store clear text passwords in our database. If someone wants to breach our system, there's everyone's passwords. All right, and it also means that all your users are having to trust you that you're not reading their passwords, and yeah, it's really, really bad just to be storing passwords as clear text. So that is pretty well our final step. Okay, now I'm going to create a new Python file for create account. And I'm going to leave you to make the registration form and page yourself and process it in Python. But I'll show you how it works. So we'll make a console-based Python script that will create a new user for us. So we're going to import the #lib library to do the security encryption. We need to import in our SQLite database, import in the UUID because we're going to use that to create our salts, and we're going to import in getPass so that we can echo a password or have echoless inputs for our passwords. I'm also going to quickly go to the server, and we're going to copy and paste our database read and write functions. We're not going to write the retype those a second time, but we do need this database file name field, so let's just set that back to tasker.db. Okay, and so now let's create a function for create account. And so we're going to have user ID, input user ID. We're going to need email address. We're going to need their name. And we're going to need the password. All right, and we'll use getPass.getPass. All right, so that it doesn't echo to the screen when you're typing it. Right, ordinarily you would ask for the password a second time, make sure they match, etc., etc. We're just doing this quick and dirty to give you a proof of concept. So the salt. So what the idea behind the salt is? What is a salt? So when we are hashing our passwords, if we just encrypted them all, or if we hashed them all, just the pure passwords, if someone was to compromise our database and get a copy of our user accounts table, then they could just run a brute force or dictionary attack on those hashes and reverse engineer, find out what the passwords are. The idea behind a salt is it's just a random piece of text that you add to the password, so that if you're then going to brute force, you have to add that random element to the end of all the passwords. So if the password was just hello, it would be hello plus that random string. Now you need to save that random string, and so you save that into your user table. And it doesn't matter that it's there and visible, because the idea is that provided every user has a different salt, then you can't brute force all of the user database at once. You can only do one at a time, because you've got to add that salt string to the password. So if everyone had the same salt, then you'd still be brute forcing your entire user database in one go. You know, as soon as you find a match, you know, you're testing against all the users every time. Whereas you change the salt for every person, you can only crack one user at a time. So it slows down the process. All right, and we're going to use, key is key. So we use the #lib library All right, which again, you should check the Python docs on this. Go to the docs, go to hashlib, and if you scroll all the way down to where is it? What am I looking for? I went past it, didn't I? You are looking. What? That's not what I want. I just closed it. The things that are in my pop-up memory. Game damage. I don't know. Anyway, hashlib. So we are using a library called, or an algorithm, PBK. There it is. All right. This function provides password-based key derivation. All right. So this is, all right, key derivation and key stretching algorithms designed for secure password hashing. Naive algorithms such as SHA-1 are not resistant against brute force attacks. All right, a good password hashing algorithm must be tunable, slow, and include a salt. So yeah, this is a function that is built into Python and has been designed for the purposes of hashing passwords. Don't try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to password security. Use what has been provided. Anything you try to do is going to have security risks. Okay, so PBKDF2_HMAC. All right, and again, so this is just me based upon the documentation, how to use it. So password dot encode. This is, we want to encode it as UTF-8, and then the salt, we're going to encode that also UTF-8, and then we are going to run it through the hash 10,000 times and get the hex string, to turn it into a hex so that we can save it in the database that way. And so now our SQL is going to be insert into accounts. What are our fields? User ID, password, salt, email, and name. User ID, salt, password, email, name. Is that right? Yeah, I've got the order the wrong way around, but it doesn't matter. Values, user ID, salt, password, email, name. And so now I can just database write SQL. I need to create a Python dictionary. Record is equal to open close curly braces. User ID is going to be the user ID string that's up above. Salt is going to be that salt string that I've created. We're not, yeah, so password, we're not saving the actual password, we're saving the cryptographic key. All right, we don't want to, the whole point of this exercise is so that we're not saving the person's password. Email and then name. Database write. Okay. We'll just print OK. All right. Let's run create account. See if I've done this right. I need to close the server because that's running. Okay. Create account. All right. So let's just say pb email test at nowhere.com, Mr. Baumgarten test, password, let me in. And database is locked. Okay, because I've got to open here, close the database. And now I've got to run it again. User ID pb test nowhere.com, Mr. Baumgarten, let me in. Hey, one record changed. Okay, so if I go back to my database and reopen it, there it is. All right, so I've got a password which is cryptographically hashed, and I've got a salt which is a UUID1. There's my email and there's my name. Now, how can I make it so that I can log in using that? Because right now, right, I would have to, because my web page is not testing the cryptographic hashes. So right now I would just have to type that in as pure text, right? And that's obviously not what we're wanting. So let's come back into my server, and I need to change my login. All right, so here, where I'm doing this password check, I need to do the same thing. Now, I don't want to, I need to query the salt from the user table because I've stored, I need to reuse this same salt. So I need to look up the salt that's been stored for that user account and then use it to generate a key against whatever password they typed in on the login form, and then check to see if the two keys match. Right, so let's just copy that so that I don't need to work that out again in here. All right, so what I need is, this is going to be the, so I need to load up that user. And so I still need to, I need to, if the user exists, all right, I'm going to do something, but I haven't checked that it's matched yet, so I don't necessarily, that's yeah. All right, so if I typed in the username wrong, then that's when they'll go down here. So username does not exist. So user exists, password not yet checked. Okay, so now I've pulled up the user. Let's get the salt, which will be in users 0 salt. So I've got the salt now. Now I can generate the key. So the key that was used, so the real, so the saved key. Let's stick to Python style. Users 0 password. Okay, so what got stored in the password field is the cryptographic key. I want to generate a key based upon what gets typed in the HTML form. So generated key. And this needs to be, well, I need to import hashlib. I've got my yellows here, so import hashlib. All right, that fixes that. Password doesn't exist. So I want to use the password that was typed. So that is going to be form password. And I'm going to use the salt that's already there. and that's the same. So now if this key matches this key, then the passwords match. So if saved key equals generated key, the passwords match. So that means passwords match. All right, that means I now want to do this login. And if it didn't, then I'm going to send them back with invalid user password. Now, another little tip here, it's not good practice to say like here invalid user and here invalid password. You don't want to make it obvious that they got the username right and just the password was wrong. You want to, for security purposes, you want to leave as much ambiguity as possible. So you just say something about the login was invalid. And so provide the same error whether it's the user or the password. Another good security tip is we should be time limiting this, as in only allowing if the IP address that's making the request makes more than 3 invalid requests, then you want to make sure, okay, they're not allowed to make a 4th attempt, for a minute or 5 minutes or something like that. So certainly when I'm doing this in class, when we're doing the security unit, that'll be something to add. Yeah, otherwise you could just brute force thousands of attempts and keep going until you get it right. So yeah, another reason why you don't want to be saying, oh, you got the username right, just not the password, because then they can try every single password. All right, so yeah, password incorrect. That should work. So PB is the username. Let's log out. Oh, it helps if I am running my server. Okay. So PB, let me not in. Okay, that worked. PB, let me in. And that worked. Except, why is it? Oh yeah. So it's showing all the whole Baumgarten stuff because it should be showing empty because I've logged in as a different user. I haven't logged in as P Baumgarten, but that's because we are not checking this user ID on main. So if I come down to main, right, at the moment I'm selecting tasks where the folder is that and the status is that and where the ID is that. All right, so in here I want to make this where it only matches my current user ID. So I need to know who I'm logged in as. All right, so to do that, let's remind myself. Yeah. So instead of this, user is equal to Flask login, current user, get dict, and that was why we created that get dictionary function. All right, so that now I can, in here, I can say where folder ID is equal to that and status ID is not equal to that, and user ID is equal to, since we've already got an F string here, is to do user.id. All right, and we'll do the same to get in the task, and user ID is equal to user.id and folders where user ID is equal to user ID user.id, and that needs the F in front of it. So now hopefully Dictate has no attribute ID. Oh, I'm getting the dictionary, not the object. Sorry. So that should be that. Key error ID. Of course, because I called it user ID. No such column PB. Because I'm not doing the SQL lookup. Put these single quotes around this. Otherwise it tried to look it up as an actual field. Okay. It's getting late, can you tell? Okay, there we go. Task for Mr. Baumgarten, which is the correct name for that particular user. I should now be able to create folders for this person. Yeah. Let's create a task. And there it is. And if we look in the database, there's a task for PB. So now if I want to log in as, let's log out. When I log in as my other user, this is a test, will no longer work. All right, because now we are cryptographically hashing what gets typed in and checking it. So for now, I'm just going to copy and paste this in. All right, the filter, the salt has to, well, for this key to work, I need the same salt. But like I said, that's not, you don't want to use same salt. So that's why when we're creating accounts, it randomly generates a different one each time. Okay. This is at the point where I think we can put it live on the web, because we are now 3 hours and 7 minutes into the video. Okay, there's other changes I would make, but that's good enough for now. All right, Python Anywhere has a nice little free plan that you can use. And you can create as many accounts as you want. So long, one for each email address. So I think I've got a project here which I'm going to have to delete. Delete that. Create new web app, because the free plan only lets you have one app at a time. So that's why I've just deleted that. Create a new app. Your app, web app's domain name. So on the free plan, it's just based upon your username. And I'm creating a Flask project, Python 3.8. Okay, this is enter a path for the Python file you wish to hold your Flask app. So because I called mine server.py, I'm just going to change this to the same. Set next. Let it run the wizard. And then if I go to files, I now want to upload into my site my project. And it has what was here from the previous one. So I'm just going to delete all this. Upload. Now let's see if this is going to let me wrong repos video. What's the chances that it will just allow me to upload? No, it's only letting me upload single files. Okay. Templates. All right, hang on. Let's just get rid of the old project that's there. So if I go to templates, I need login and main. And then if I go to static, I want to delete all of these. And upload the contents of my static folder. Including all those icons. If anyone from Python Anywhere is watching, it would be nice to be able to drag and drop to upload multiple files at once. Sorry about this. Probably just skip forward 30 seconds. I haven't even used all these icons. I can't remember exactly which ones I've got. Search I haven't used. Anyway, send, we're almost there. I wonder if anyone's going to give me the magic word. Who's going to have watched this far through? Should I have another magic word if you got this far? Hungry. How about that? I still haven't had dinner, and oh, it's 9:23. Crikey. Hungry. So there was a magic word earlier in the video, which I won't repeat now. And at the end of the video, the magic word is hungry. If you tell me both words, you deserve a gold star. All right, I think this is ready to go now. There's my server.py. Reload. What's the chances this is going to work first go? And if I open this in the web browser, something went wrong. Here we go. Let's check the error logs. No module name Flask session. So I need, Flask login. So I need to go to the console and open up in Bash. I need to do the pip install. All right, and that's just pip 3 install flask underscore login. And now, where do I get back to my, here we go, my dashboard. Back to web, reload. Still something wrong. Okay. Hold on a sec. I knew I should have done this right at the very beginning. Okay, we need to make one quick little change to our server.py file. Instead of just app run like this, if underscore name underscore double underscores on both of them, double equals quotes double underscore main double underscore quote, indent that in. All right, because when we're running on a live web server, we don't want this line of code to run. We only want it to actually do this when we're doing it in development mode in VS Code. So I need to make that little change to your server.py and re-upload. So I've got a files into my site, delete that, re-upload it. Go back to web, reload, and just note with the free plan you have to log into it at least once every 3 months and just click this little button, and it's just their way of making sure you're actually using the free plan. Okay, that looks okay. Yeah, there we go. And so now, what was it? Let me in. Internal server error. Okay, so I've done what now? What have I done? We're almost there. No such table accounts. Did I upload the wrong database? In database read. Hang on a sec. Yeah, I had to upload the database to my home folder rather than the my site folder. And now it works. Cool. And now I've got secure. I've got my web app online. It's not using a secure certificate. Python anyway doesn't give that to you with the free plan, so it's not encrypted. So do keep that in mind. But otherwise, yeah, not bad for a free plan. Or upgrade if you want the secure certificate, or set up a proper web server yourself. So, but anyway, 3 hours and 17 minutes. But we went from beginning all the way through. We have a working to-do application. I hope that was useful. I hope it was useful. I hope someone actually watched this. This is Mr. Baumgarten signing out.